It's been close to a full year since I reviewed Fallout 4, which was the first time that I had ever reviewed a brand new game within the first 2 weeks or so of release. And since then, I've come to disagree with a lot of what I said in that review. Retrospectively, Fallout 4 was a disappointment for me. Sometimes I even forget that it exists. So I decided to jump back into Fallout 4 with this DLC for 2 reasons. Firstly, I wanted to see how I would feel about Fallout 4 in general after going so long without playing it. And secondly, I wanted to see how Bethesda was handling DLC for this game. Nuka World is the last DLC for Fallout 4, being preceded by 2 other quest-based DLCs and a litany of Wasteland Workshop add-ons. Neither of those quest-based DLCs caught my attention, and I'm puzzled as to why the Wasteland Workshop DLCs even exist, seeing as all platforms can now run mods. Nuka World caught my attention due to its premise of raiders using this theme park as a fortress, almost like a large-scale version of Paradise Falls from Fallout 3. And in addition to that, it's Bethesda's largest DLC ever, at least in terms of map size.
He's off! Let's hope our latest prey can draw a little inspiration from our previous victims.
Nuka World itself is a separate area from the rest of the game, requiring use of a train to get there, which is nothing new if you've ever played any of the Fallout 3 DLC. Once you're there, the first thing you do is make your way through the Gauntlet, which is not only painfully easy, but looks like something that could have been made with the vanilla settlement builder by a random player. The Gauntlet's idea of a challenge is randomly throwing a ton of turrets and booby traps into a building haphazardly and hoping that's enough to convince players that this is what a sophisticated raider's stronghold would come up with. It's a bad first impression, only salvaged by a somewhat clever, at least by the standards of this DLC, boss fight, where a guy in power armor rigged his suit to the ceiling of a bumper car arena to give his suit extra power. The only way to beat him is to squirt him with a fucking water gun to lower his shields. It's one of the few times that DLC manages to merge the theme park style with Fallout's in a creative and convincing way. The raiders of Nuka World use this gauntlet to enslave people, recruit new raiders, just kill people for fun, or in the case of the lone survivor/player character, to appoint a new raider overlord. That boss I mentioned was the previous leader of the raider factions, and his approval ratings were becoming quite low with the inhabitants, raiders, and leaders of Nuka World. This leads to the previous leader's right-hand man, Gage, conspiring against him. Gage is the one who orchestrates the entire boss fight and provides the player character with the water gun so that he can win the fight. After the fight, he recruits you to be the new overboss and tasks you with helping the raiders of Nuka World expand outward into the rest of the theme park. Gage is the only interesting character in Nuka World for me, and he also happens to be the new companion, which I'm sure is not a coincidence. It seems as if Bethesda intended for him to be your companion throughout this DLC, as he will frequently interject himself into your conversations with the other raiders. I say he's interesting because he's a lot more thoughtful than the average raider, recognizing that their self-destructive nature is of detriment to their full potential. Nuka World is run by 3 different groups of raiders that each have their own very shallow gimmick to make them distinctive from one another. There's the Disciples, who are all women and enjoy draping all their structures in corpses, the Pack, who are frat bros making the best of the apocalypse, and the Operators. I'm not really sure what they do. I think they're going for a Tunnel Snakes vibe. I could be completely wrong about that though. Hell, I could be wrong about all of them. These are just my best guesses from the short time I spent interacting with them, because the game does an abysmal job of dishing out the lore for these factions and how they came to be. One of the very first quests is having a chat with the leaders of each of these factions, and after that, your dealings with them are limited to doing boring Radiant quests that consist of travel to this random place outside of Nuka World, kill the random NPC, and come back so you can do it all over again. Why is the overboss doing this kind of stuff anyway? Shouldn't a grunt be doing this stuff? Any semblance of a story ceases to exist after the first hour of playing. The rest of the main quest line is just clearing out the 5 other subparks so that the raider factions can expand outward. After clearing the first subpark, the allure of the seemingly expansive Nuka World began to crumble around me. Each of the parks are decently sized, but there's not much to be found within them. Except for enemies, they're filled to the brim with those. Each of the parks are inhabited by 1 or 2 types of enemies, and it really shows. At best, you'll be bored of areas like the kids' park that has nothing but ghouls. At worst, you'll want to uninstall the game from your computer, like with the bottling plant, which is seemingly filled with an infinite amount of Mirelurks. I read that Nuka World introduces new enemies, but as far as I can tell, almost all of these enemies are just reskins and renamings of previously existing ones. Gator claws, these are just death claws with alligator features on them. Nuka lurks, just some mire lurks with a blue glow to them. Painted ghouls, really? The only two enemies that seem like truly new enemies are the flies and bloodworms, the latter of which behave like mole rats burrowing into the ground periodically and are just a general nuisance. When the subparks are cleared, they are to be assigned to one of the factions. There's only 5 parks, but 3 factions, which means that it is impossible to dish out these areas in a fair way. Whichever faction gets fucked over the most will have to be dealt with at the end of the main quest, which is far less intense than it really sounds. I haven't found every weapon in Nuka World yet, but most of the ones that I haven't found seem to be variants of pre-existing ones. Besides the water gun from the Gauntlet, the 2 main new weapons are the handmade rifle and the Nuka Nuke launcher. The handmade rifle is essentially an AK-47, or Chinese rifle in the Fallout world, which was oddly absent from the vanilla game. I really enjoyed using it and making variants of it, and used it as one of my main weapons during this DLC. The Nuka Nuke launcher is a unique item rewarded for the Cappy in a Haystack side quest, but it's really just a normal fat man with increased damage and a different type of ammunition. Even the Fallout Wiki admits that. There's not many side quests in Nuka World. In fact, there's only 2 that are true side quests and not just main quest offshoots. The first is a quest with a cult called the Hubologists, where you get them some spacesuits, escort them to a theme park ride, power it up with fusion cores, and that's it. Very boring. The second quest, Cappy in a Haystack, is the best quest in all of Nuka World, and it's even given to you by a returning Fallout 3 character. You're tasked with scouring all 5 subparks for these hidden symbols that each give you a letter that is then unscrambled into a password to enter a mysterious locked building in the main park. There's a shocking and interesting surprise in there as well as some worthwhile loot. The end game for Nuka World is settlement raiding, where you send one of the factions to forcibly take over one of the previously existing settlements in the Commonwealth. I got bored with this before the tutorial quest for it was even over, because it is in no way different from the settlement mechanics of the original game, other than having a raider label slapped on top of it.
You, the Nuka World waste pile, that thought you could move your gang into Sinner's territory and live? You give me one good reason I shouldn't slice you open and eat your heart right here.
You listen closely. This land is ours. So turn around and crawl back under whatever rock you came from. Right now.
Whoa, easy. Take it easy, alright? Sure, just, keep it. Place was a shithole anyway.
I'm feeling around a 4 out of 10 on Nuka World, which might seem harsh. Was I expecting too much from a DLC? I don't think so. Bethesda themselves put out a handful of decent to good DLC for Fallout 3, and Obsidian's DLC for New Vegas was arguably better than the already great vanilla game itself. I never felt like a raider overboss in Nuka World, just another useful idiot doing boring grunt work with no real payoff at the end of it. There's no reason to play this DLC, other than if you're a hardcore Fallout fan that's dying to play more. It's a shallow, uninspired experience hidden behind a seemingly intriguing veneer.
You come into someone's home, steal their belongings, and kill those they care about.